So next on our agenda here, Lenny Kerman is here to talk about the future of cannabis and in Panama 2020. And please help me welcome Lenny.
Hi everyone. Last speaker of the day. I know there's a Q&A session afterwards, so I really appreciate everyone sticking around. I think it's kind of funny that they bring in a Canadian 38-year-old from Toronto to talk about the future of Panama 2020. Aren't you all excited to hear me tell you about your marketplace? From my standpoint, what I want to make sure is that everyone's very comfortable with my pace of speech as well. I want to make sure I don't go too fast about anything. I do have a very short timeline only because we do have a Q&A session that's after me, as well as iCAN is holding a tour and the bus is leaving at 4 o'clock, so I'd like to wrap up a few minutes earlier. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to take some time today and talk about the future of cannabis. And the way I wanted to do that, of course, is to create an analogy. I've been doing presentations for many years. I used to actually be in the financial services industry, as well as I'm a certified trainer in neuro-linguistic programming, which is a sales criteria and a way of communicating, which I'll address a little bit later. The point is that everything I do and everything I try to focus on is perception. And when I was originally crafting this presentation and having the conversation with Chris Bolton, the COO of my organization and the founder, he said, just go out there and ask some people what they think is really important to the cannabis industry for Panama. And I said to myself, really, the best way to do that is to start figuring out what the sentiment in Panama is. Where are people thinking? Do they feel like they're too late to the party? Do they feel like everything is moving in other jurisdictions, and in here, things are a little bit behind the 8 ball? And I create the analogy of being late to a party. Because the conversation that I'm constantly having is, are you too late? And the answer is, of course not. You're just fashionably late. And when you're fashionably late for a party, and by the way, I'm a complete nerd, so I wasn't invited to any parties in high school, so it's really exciting for me to talk about parties and being fashionably late. What I figured out is that I had to speak to cool people and people who were invited to those parties to ensure I figured out what it is to be fashionably late. So when you have the opportunity of being fashionably late, what you do is you figure out whether this is a party that you even want to be at. So meaning that you figure out, what is this party all about? What is going on in the industry as it pertains to cannabis? We need to know, what is the cannabis industry evolving into? You've heard about it all day today. You've heard about it from Lauren Gertner. You've heard about it from Chris Bolton. You've heard about it from Alfredo. There's so many people who have an insight as to what the cannabis industry is, but my skill set has always been creating analogies, or at least breaking it down to its lowest common denominator. Making sure that the industry that you're potentially investing in is easy to understand from all optics. Also, I want to find out, if I'm going to a party, who's going to be there. I've been single for quite some time, not throwing it out there to any of the ladies, but generally what I will say is that when you go to a party, you want to know who's going to attend this party to ensure that you potentially have a good dancing partner to work out with. Then, of course, you're going to figure out what you're going to wear, because anytime you head into a new industry or you're heading to a new place, you want to make sure how you're going to be perceived. The example I like to provide to people is that I could come up here and stand today and be in jeans and a t-shirt, and your perception of me is that I'm going to be a complete schlub, or I'm not going to be someone that you're going to be trustworthy. But if you actually look at me, I'm in my suit and tie, because that's the perception I want you to actually take on, that I'm professional, that I know what I'm talking about. Also, you can decide whether this is a party you want to step into. Is this an industry that is going to be relevant for the long term? Is this going to be just a 1-year or 2-year pop or valuation? Or is it going to be a long-term influential marketplace that all of us want to step into? That's really relevant, because the concern that is happening globally right now on the investor front is this a bubble? You may have heard that a few times today as well. Is the cannabis sector a bubble that's going to implode upon one day? So we need to evaluate that as well. And then lastly, we can see if we can get a ride home. Meaning that, is there a legal framework that we can operate within to make sure that the black market is weeded out? Because we don't want to be operating in such a way that our nest egg or our financials are going to be impeded or potentially taken away down the road. So the one thing I'll say is this. There's a great deal of perception in the cannabis industry, and I want to focus on that in my talk today. In particular, this is a very exciting industry. It's evolving very quickly, and people see people making tons and tons of money. There's profit to be made, but there are major challenges. This industry takes agricultural, pharma, food, recreational, fun, technology, all wrapped into one, and you have all the challenges of that. The example I like to provide people with is that I live in Canada, and of course everyone knows that Canada has legalized recreational cannabis. Does that mean that everything's easy and hunky-dory in Canada? Not at all the case. Canada has a fractured marketplace in terms of how we have this legislation. So at a federal level, it's legal, but each province has its own legalization in how they distribute cannabis. And as a result, what has happened is that people who want to have access to cannabis, there isn't enough, or there isn't access, or the way they had this rollout was incorrect. So even when things are completely legal and money is flowing freely, there still are challenges that we all have to overcome. So whenever I'm making a comment to someone in the financial services industry, the comment I make is you need to go into any industry with eyes wide open. And while there is a great deal of capital and profit to be made, one needs to understand the complexities of the industry that we're in. We don't step into a party unless we know exactly what we're getting into. So here I am. This is my cute little face. What I mentioned already is that while I do have a very large background in finance, I've been in finance since 2003, I also have a very strong backing in psychology. I mentioned already, I'm a master practitioner of neuro-linguistic programming, and most people have no idea what neuro-linguistic programming is. So I'd like to take 1 second and just quickly address what that is. It means the language you use can sometimes influence how you perceive the world. So meaning, many people I've met in Panama to date have a limiting belief. And the limiting belief is that they say, I'm late to the marketplace. Everything has moved past us already, and if we don't get going immediately, we're going to miss the boat. We're going to miss the party, and I've kind of been focusing on that quite a bit so far. And that is a limiting belief, and the more you say it to yourself, the more likely you're going to perceive the world as that. You're going to look out for identification or confirmation, I should say, that that reality is the case. But what I'm here to tell you is if you actually look at the facts, the market is still in its infancy. The cannabis market is still extraordinarily young, and I'm going to spend the next few slides specifically going about that, explaining to you how young the marketplace is. The first comment I'd like to make is that global merger and acquisition is just incredibly strong in the cannabis industry. If you happen to follow any of the major news wires, you're seeing almost on a daily basis, new deals are being structured in the cannabis industry. The biggest one of note that most people have seen is that you saw Constellation Brands take a big chunk out of Canopy Growth, which was the biggest player in the marketplace. Now, one would think, okay, we're late to the industry because we saw that, but that is more of a clue than us being late. That is saying to us, this is what is to come in the cannabis industry. iAnthus just had a very large merger. You saw that Cronos had a large merger with Big Tobacco, and that is, again, another clue as to where things are going. Let's look at the global footprint in terms of legalization and legislation. We see that very few countries have actually legalized cannabis at a recreational level, only really 2, Canada and Uganda. Many have decriminalized, and there are lots of states in the States that have actually legalized, but that creates a whole other quagmire I'm about to get into. Then, of course, we also have medical being legalized in 15 countries, and many more are tabling legislation right now. So yes, it is important that Panama does start actually creating their legislation for legalization, even for the medical side of things, because that would be the first step to create proper legalization. But the big thing I want to focus in on is this. Very few big players are actually in the marketplace. So I'll say that again because I need to make the impact. Very few big players are in the marketplace. While everyone has an affinity towards Aurora and Canopy and Cronos and Hilo or Hydropothecary, all those big players, and even Chiron, who had who's doing a lot of sponsorship here today. Sorry. What we're finding is that those guys, even though they have very large market caps, I consider them to be very small players on a global scale in the realm of the way I see the marketplace developing. And I will spend time on that in the presentation. But here's the first thing. Let's talk about the cannabis marketplace globally, and this is why they brought me here. This is why I'm doing this presentation, is because I want to focus on what cannabis really is. First thing is it this? So when I started in the industry back in 2016, I was telling my Jewish mother in Toronto, hey, I'm going to be stepping into the cannabis marketplace. And if anyone knows a Jewish mother, they were very nervous people. They said, no way, no how, because this is what the marketplace is. It's an illegal marketplace. You don't want to be in that. I don't want my son involved in that. I don't want you to be part of that. But what I had to explain to my mother, I need to explain to every single person I meet on a day-to-day basis, that cannabis is actually what's on the right. It's not what's on the left right here. Meaning that cannabis is a beverage product. Cannabis can be a medical ointment. Cannabis can be an anxiety medication. I'll focus on that in the next slide as well. It can be our research and development to treat things like anxiety or epilepsy. It can be a food product to help people lose weight. It can be so many different things. So cannabis currently is the focus, but it's the derivatives of cannabis that will become the focus. And that's where this industry is going. So what you'll see is as Big Pharma steps into the industry or Big Tobacco steps into the industry, the focus will no longer be on cannabis. It will be on THC, CBD, CBN, flavonoids, terpenes, all the things and the derivatives of the cannabis plant to put into secondary product lines. So the recreational marketplace, while it is a huge marketplace, in my eyes, is a much smaller marketplace than all the ancillary products that will come from cannabis. And that's specifically what I see happening here in Panama as well. Now let's quickly evolve to how large is this marketplace. And this is what I spent some time doing while doing some research to help blow up everyone's island in terms of where this is all going. So the anxiety market, in terms of medication globally, is $7.5 billion. Cannabis is a true disruptive technology, and I see that cannabis, let's say, can take 10% of any one of these marketplaces, at least, if not more. So the anxiety market is $7.5 billion. That's $750 million that they could take from that marketplace via drug development or research and development. Sleep aid market, 101. So the Ambiens of the world or the NyQuils of the world, the things that help us sleep at night, well, of course, if we took 10%, that's another $10 billion in the cannabis marketplace as well. Arthritis. My mother, again, is someone who suffers from arthritis, very bad rheumatoid arthritis. That market is $30.4 billion. That, if we take three, that's $3 billion. Pain management, A535, or any topical ointment that help you relieve pain. That's a marketplace that cannabis is going to be focused on as well. Epilepsy market. Has anyone heard of GW Pharma? Just a quick show of hands. Okay, so GW Pharma released a drug in the States, FDA approved, that is based on CBD technology to treat epilepsy. And that is the first of many drugs that are currently in development for all the ailments that I'm going through right here. Now let's focus on recreational for a second. The energy drink marketplace, so Gatorade, Monster Energy Drink. That's $72 billion marketplace, and cannabis is already starting to take a piece of that. That's why Constellation Brands took such a chunk out of Canopy. Continuing on, the beer market, again, using that Constellation Brands mechanism right there, you see a $750 billion market. If cannabis takes 10% of that, that's a $70 billion marketplace. Continuing on, the weight loss market, people sometimes think that cannabis is something that you get the munchies off of, but there are certain parts of cannabis, such as CBN, that actually potentially help suppress appetite. So a while back, there was something that came out called green coffee beans. Anyone heard of the green coffee bean marketplace? Yes, show of hands, make sure you're alive. Excellent, fantastic. You'll notice that helped people lose weight. Same thing for cannabis. They are developing drugs and naturopathic and nutraceuticals that help reduce people's appetite using CBD. Opioid market. So in the United States, as well as Canada, as well as globally, there's an epidemic that has developed, and that is people's use of opioids. And what we have found already via a variety of different studies is that cannabis helps people get off the opioid crisis effectively and without any type of addiction. So conservatively, most analysts are coming out and saying that the cannabis marketplace is approximately $149 billion. That's a fairly large marketplace, right? I believe that market and that number that they're producing there is actually very conservative. So I just want to say that again, 149 billion is actually the conservative number. I believe the marketplace to be significantly larger because based on research and development happening at big pharma, happening at very large product lines, we see that that marketplace is going to grow exponentially over the next few years. So I mentioned to you earlier, and here's where math now starts to come into the equation. Who are the biggest players in the cannabis marketplace? Well, Aurora is pretty big. We see their $9.5 billion market cap. Market cap of Canopy Growth is 21 billion. Market cap of Afri is 3.5 billion. Market cap of Kronos is 4.6 billion. Does anyone have any idea what the revenue numbers of those companies are? I see some people cringing. Sorry? Probably, if I had a percentage, close to zero. Exactly. It doesn't mean that they're bad companies. It just means that those valuations are based on the future growth of the cannabis marketplace. Now, if I, let's say, took the entire cultivation world and aggregated them together, would they equate to 149 billion? The answer is no, they would not even come close. So there's a lot of room in the marketplace, and this is where clues are being left. And here's the big clue. Here's who's coming. And they're going to come, and when they do, that's going to make waves. You think Aurora's big now? You think Canopy's big right now? You think Kronos is big right now? Wait till they get here. Because the product development is where these guys are going to be. They don't give you-know-what about cultivation. They're looking for all of us here in this room and the parties that are currently already cultivating to cultivate. What these guys care about more so is product development. That's why Constellation Brands has no interest in cultivating themselves. They have an interest in Canopy being the cultivation partner, and they will develop beverages together. And they will develop other delivery systems together. And that's what's going to happen globally. So if someone says to you, where's the market right now? Is it a mature marketplace or a junior marketplace? This gives you credence because have any of these guys really come in a big way yet? No, almost none of them. Why do you think that's the case? It has to do with what I said earlier, is that even though Canada is a regulated marketplace, completely legal, it's still a fractured marketplace. It's one that doesn't operate cleanly. And these guys will wait because they don't mind spending extra money as long as everything's nice and clean and tidy. Using the States as an example, and here's one of the greatest opportunities that Panama has, is the United States has created a complete cluster, you know what, in terms of operation, because at a state level, they have 33 states that have legalized, but at a federally level, they are completely illegal. What does that do to the banking system in the states as it pertains to cannabis? Can anyone actually put their money in the banks at a state level? No, because all banks are federally regulated at the states, in the states. And in regards to us banking here in Panama, can most of us currently bank in the cannabis industry either? And the answer is not effectively. Reason being because many banks actually touch the states. So this is one of the greatest opportunities that actually Panama has, is that Panama has 90 banks in this jurisdiction right here that do not touch an American bank, creating a significant opportunity, a strategic opportunity that Panama can move forward with. So me being a capital markets guy, not a cannabis guy, I've recognized that, and of course that's of significant interest to me. Because that's why TheraCann is actually in Panama, is simply because of that. Now moving back to my party analogy, we see that of course, when we do show up, how do we dress? And Alfredo just told you exactly the issues associated with the cannabis industry in other places and other places globally. Cannabis is expensive to cultivate properly. Let me just say that again. Cannabis is expensive to cultivate properly because there are many people out there right now who are growing outdoors because they say something like in Colombia, you have 12 on and 12 off and not a lot of humidity. So therefore growing outside is no problem, right? Not necessarily the case because if you're going to import into places like Germany or Canada or elsewhere, globally, what will eventually happen is the only way you're going to be allowed to import is really if your product is GMP, ISO certified and all those things. Make sure that it's completely pharmaceutical grade, but also that there's no variance from batch to batch. Can you guarantee that there's no variance from batch to batch when you grow outside? And the answer is absolutely not. You cannot. You cannot create a lack of variance. So the concern at a German level, let's say, would be, is if I'm importing for medicinal use, I need to know that every batch you produce for this strain is going to be exactly the same. So 15% THC, let's say, 10% CBD, 5% CBN, or whatever those numbers are. And that variance can't be 17 to 20%, which is an outside grow. You need to grow indoors. So that one of the comments and recommendations I would make to any marketplace that is looking to export product globally for the purpose of either food consumption or medicinal use is that you need to have a very large portion of your cultivation indoors. Outdoors is for recreational, and I'll show you a slide in just a few seconds, but that's really important, is that your product needs to be lack of variability. The second thing that I'll say with regards to that a clue has been left is you need to have provenance of your supply chain. You need to know where your product is at all times. Because when you're exporting cannabis globally, there's lots of places that product can actually be changed over for some potential counterfeit. This is happening all over the states right now where actual cultivators are supplying to a state, let's say Arizona, and when they go to their dispensaries, they find that most of the product in that dispensary is actually counterfeit, illegal black market product. So to keep track of your supply chain throughout the entire logistical transfer from, let's say, Panama to Germany is going to be extremely important. You're going to have that in terms of your ledger. So now that we understand what we need to look like, we need to understand that it's important that this is okay for recreational. If Panama wants to be a recreational country, then everything can be grown outside, it's fine, no problem. And if you just want to supply to internal Panama, then that's what we'll do. We'll just stay in here, we won't be able to export whatsoever. But if we want the opportunity to export to foreign jurisdictions like Germany, like France, like Spain, or wherever, we're going to need to look much more like the one on the right, which is indoor grow, much more like a pharmaceutical grow. I'll take questions afterwards. Yeah, sorry, thanks, because we're 2 minutes left. So will this be a good thing for Panama? I need to move a little bit faster because I see that we got to get out of here in a few seconds. So I'll just move through the last few slides quite quickly. Let's talk from an employment perspective. In Canada, we saw a 266% growth of employment in the cannabis sector in 1 year. Is that a good thing for Panama? I would suggest that it is. Is the average mean and average salary higher than the regular person who's not working in the cannabis industry? And the answer is yes, absolutely. So it's a good thing for employment. And it also requires skilled labor. So those individuals who happen to work in the cannabis sector, like I mentioned already, you are learning agricultural, you are learning pharmaceutical, you're learning food product, you're learning some skill sets that you would never learn if you just, let's say, grew lettuce. You're learning some very intricate things. From an ownership case study, the people who actually owned cannabis operations in Canada, well, I think the writing's on the wall. They made a lot of money, most of them. Some of them, of course, are still going through the licensing process. So ownership within Panama, which is why I'm here to address this, is what's really relevant. Of course, there's lots of opportunity for companies from outside to come in, but from my perspective, what would be really cool to see is Panama, once it is a recreational or even medically legal enterprise, that those companies that come out of Panama are homegrown companies. Just like we were talking about from a Jamaica perspective, the same thing should actually occur within the Panama perspective. If we're going to be exporting cannabis globally, we need to make sure that we are a homegrown enterprise so that the benefits, of course, are reaped by the people within Panama. Is Colombia a fair comparison? Not at all. Now, I've put up some statistics there. They're incomplete statistics. What I wanted to show specifically with that first one right there is that we see that 7 Canadian licensed producers, the big players within Colombia, they put $100 million. All of that money will go into Colombia and actually come right out of Colombia. So that's great for Colombia for an employment perspective, but from a tax perspective, not very good. Also, from an ownership perspective, is that a good thing? Not very good. Also, the focus for Colombia, because there's about 1,000 cultivators, sorry. Okay, I'll wrap up in a second, okay? 1 more minute for me, okay, fantastic. So what I'll say is this, when we're focusing on the marketplace I love my pictures, by the way. If you don't like my pictures, you haven't laughed, you're really not paying attention. Carlton is like my hero, okay? No jokes here. Panama should be focusing and carving its own path, simply because you have a strategic opportunity here in the banking sector as well as the actual transportation sector. Because, of course, the Panama Canal allows us to be a gateway from the east to the west and vice versa, north to south in South America and North America. What I'll say is Panama should be cultivating in such a way that it creates a pharmaceutical export economy here. If it does so, banking regulations will actually come in a lot easier, as well as you'll be able to export the product much easier than places like in Canada. Here's a quick little analysis, if there's any regulators in the room, as to what one pharmaceutical level facility looks like. The build-out cost is expensive, and I'm first to say that. But if you look at the assumptions, I've been very, very conservative in my assumptions. Flour at $5.50 a gram, oil, pharmaceutical level oil at $30 a gram. Look at your revenue numbers, look at your average salary, look at how many employees are hired in that one facility, as well as look at what the tax revenue derived from something like that is, and that can be put back into the economy within Panama. So as I need to wrap up, I hope that, of course, you guys had enjoyed the conversation. I'm going to be around for about another 10 seconds, but I will be on the actual tour. So if you're coming on the tour, come see me. If you need to talk to me, come see me because my booth is here as well at the TheraCann booth, and I will be there tomorrow. I'd love to take questions, but literally they need me to go. So I really appreciate you listening. I hope you have a fantastic day. And if you have any questions, I'm here. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Lenny.